You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Dern.
This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly is brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com. Caneswear.com. And welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to a finally unveiled new episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Dern. You can follow me on X at KevinMD4 or on Instagram at KevinMDern. You can follow the show on DolphinsTalk.com and be sure to follow along with all the other writers and podcasters on the DolphinsTalk.com family. Deeply apologize for the huge delay between episodes. If I've got my figures right, the last episode I dropped was back on September 21st, recapping the Bills' loss on Thursday Night Football, which feels like years ago. Finally back. I just got back from Miami yesterday. I'm recording this on Tuesday night, the 23rd. Went down to see the Dolphins play the Bengals with my brother-in-law, our annual trip to Miami that we've made each of the last 4 seasons now, and got to talk to some friends down there and some people who are, I'll just say, more in the know about the Dolphins than I am, and felt compelled to finally get back behind the mic. And that's not the only reason I've stayed away. I know this season has been pretty bad. I think if I remember right, I said if everything went right, the Dolphins were probably a 9 or 10 win team at most. And you can kind of go back and look at some of the games that they blew. You know, the Patriots game in week 2, the Bills game after the last episode with the Zach Sealer roughing the punter. You can look at the Chargers game, the Panthers game. And the way the season's played out, I feel like that was probably about right if things broke correctly for the Dolphins, and clearly they have not. The other reason I haven't been able to record a show in a long while is, I think I did mention this on the last podcast, that I was in the running for a promotion at my job, which is a subsidiary company in Amazon's big umbrella. And in November, early November, I got the job and have now been managing not one but really 2 global teams. We're not managed in terms of what we create as far as like revenue, but if we were, just to give you an idea of how busy things have been, on top of having a wife who works full-time as a surgical nurse and a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old at home who are getting active and into sports. Our 5-year-old just recently took up jiu-jitsu, which I think is awesome. She just earned her first stripe on Monday night, so that was very cool for us to see. You know, way to go, Emmy. But in terms of what our company does, if you were to measure it in revenue, our company as a whole globally was responsible for about $850 million last year, of which the team I directly manage is responsible for almost 400 of that 850. There are several hundred employees within this organization. The 2 teams I manage are comprised of about 10 people total, give or take, depending on the turnover we have during the time of the year. And it's very challenging. It's very interesting. It's a sector of work I never thought I'd get into. But it's very cool. I like it a lot, but it is time consuming, especially when we have teams across 3 different continents right now. So it keeps me pretty busy, and I haven't had time to record podcasts like I've wanted to. And with the way the season's played out, sometimes I just downright haven't wanted to. But I felt compelled to make a podcast given that this week I actually have some time off, and we'll have some time off next week as well, finally. Ready for a little bit of a break since taking on more responsibility. So felt compelled to just kind of unload the notepad and sort of let's take stock of the situation as things are for the Dolphins as I record this on December 23rd. And quite frankly, it's been nice to see. I've had multiple people reach out and ask when I'm going to have another podcast, both through, social media platforms and Reddit and message boards, and other people have called and texted me about it. I truly heartfelt thank you to everybody who listens to the show. I honestly didn't have an idea of how broad the audience is. Even if I only had a handful of loyal listeners, the whole process is cathartic. For me, I don't make a dime off of podcasting. I know people who would probably sponsor me if I asked them to, but I'm always grateful for Mike and the Dolphins Talk family for giving me this platform and the flexibility to kind of come and go as I please and as I need to. Not always easy with a full-time working spouse and 2 kids in school. Just is what it is. So anyway, we'll strap in. We'll have a nice long chat in this episode, and it'll be kind of free-flowing. I gave kind of a loose outline to myself of what to follow, kind of just based on what I learned over the weekend and what I've learned throughout this part of the season. And one request did come in, and actually a couple people echoed this, is they wanted a new whiskey segment. And, well, wouldn't you know it, I finally have a new whiskey. This one's actually a bourbon. And if you've listened to the show over the years, you know I've reviewed a relative of this bourbon, Widow Jane 10. I think I did that last year. So anyway, this was actually a buy in response to, just giving myself a congratulations to getting the promotion and being able to have that challenge and being able to take that next step in my professional life. Just went to the liquor store and was looking around. Most of the scotches that they had, I've already tried, so I didn't really find anything new, and was actually there looking for a High West bourbon and stumbled across this. It's Widow Jane Lucky 13, which I'm not a big bourbon connoisseur guy who trades bourbon or anything like that, but I've been told it's one of the more rare ones to find that's pretty widely produced. This one was bottled in 2024 and 93 proof. I've opened it, so this isn't the first time tasting it for me, but a lot of what you smell, it smells like an old fashioned, like the full cocktail. You get a little bit of the orange, you get the cherry, you get the bourbon flavor, and honestly, it kind of reminds me of an old fashioned that maybe has a lot of cherry in it. So here's our sip of the night to start the show. And again, that's kind of what I think of it. It's an old fashioned with a little bit more cherry. And I really like cherry flavor. Like if you were going to ask me, and you can call me a plain Jane for this, but if you were going to ask me what's my favorite soda of all time, it'd probably be cherry Pepsi, and followed closely, if you've ever had it, cherry RC is not far behind it. So I really like this one. It's pretty easy drinking. It doesn't have a long finish. Again, 93 proof, so it's not super heavy, but a really tasty, flavorful bourbon if you like the cherry flavor. Now, I've read some reviews. I read some reviews before I drank it, and a lot of people said that they got kind of the flavor of Smarties, the candy. I haven't noticed that. Shared this with a couple of friends, maybe about halfway through the bottle. None of us got the Smarties flavor. So I don't know. I've seen that out there. I've read that out there multiple times. I don't get it. Maybe your palate's a little more refined than mine. Maybe you taste it. I don't know. But Widow Jane Lucky 13, I would give that a solid 4 4.6, 4.7 out of 5. It's very good. One of my favorite bourbons I think I've ever had. But bourbon and job talk isn't why you're here, and we've almost gone 10 minutes into the show at this point. Let's get into Miami Dolphins football. As much as we may not want to at this point of the season, let's do it. And I guess we'll just kind of start like recapping the trip to Miami. I went down there for the Bengals game, got to see, my longtime friend Travis Wingfield, who works for the team, and he knew that my brother-in-law and I were in town for the game, helped us get tickets, and even offered to give us a stadium tour. So we got to check out pretty much everything other than like the owner's suite that we could get access to. We got to go on the field. If you followed me on Twitter or Instagram, I've got some cool photos. We were allowed to go on the field, but had to stay off the throwback logo and the end zone pattern because that was still drying when we were there. But very cool to see. And cool to see kind of the whole operation of the stadium and what it takes to be successful and how much actually goes into an NFL game, even one that's not, like a sellout. The stadium is beautiful. We got to go to the 72 Club, got to check out some of the other suites, got to check out the club level, press box, all of that. It's top-notch, first class. The 72 Club looks like you're staying in a starred hotel. It's very, very nice, very modern. And all the production and stuff that they do, it really is first class. And it just kind of hit home like how much of a shame it is that all the money and all the time and energy that Stephen Ross and Tom Garfinkel and company have put into investing in Hard Rock Stadium and building the new facility and everything that goes along with it, and you still have this just absolute mess of a football team that is kind of in the center of this whole atmosphere. And it kind of brought home the point, and someone else who was down there that I talked to very close to the team kind of brought this up. Like, everything that you would need to be successful is there within the organization except for one thing, and that's accountability. And that stems from Stephen Ross on down. And, through my career and my past career when I worked in the sports industry, I've had the opportunity to check out several stadiums. I've been inside the Indianapolis Colts Lucas Oil Stadium multiple times. I've gotten to see the bowels of, well, now it's Paycor Stadium, but it used to be Paul Brown Stadium, the home of the Bengals. And as nice as those stadiums are, especially at Lucas Oil with all the renovations, they're not even close to what Hard Rock Stadium has become from where it was. My first visit to Hard Rock was in 2010. The place was a dump. It's truly a beautiful facility, and it's just hard to kind of reconcile in my head the complete lack of accountability in being an absentee owner and why things are the way they are with the Miami Dolphins. Now, throughout the visit, I got to talk to some people, like I said, who are a lot more in the know about the Dolphins than I am. And, and shout out to Travis, by the way. He's done awesome work with the Drive Time and Dolphins HQ, the pre- and post-game radio shows that he's doing. The dude works his ass off. He always has. He always will. That's just who Travis is. And, thank you, Travis, for showing Matt and I a great time and a really cool tour of the stadium. If you ever get a chance, check out the stadium offices at Hard Rock Stadium. There's a lot of really, really cool memorabilia. When you first walk in, they kind of have two small conference rooms to either side, left and right of the main door. And the one on the left has a lot of memorabilia from like the 72 Dolphins and Don Shula and basically anyone not named Dan Marino. If they were ever on the cover of like Sports Illustrated, it's in that room. And then the conference room on the right has every cover that Dan Marino was on, which was really cool for me to see. A lot of really great photos, a lot of huge black and white photos from everyone from Don Shula to Larry Zonka, Zach Thomas, Jason Taylor, the Marx brothers, Marino, Bob Greasy. There's even some of like the modern guys, Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, Tua, and some of those are going to be coming down in the next month, 2 months. because I'll echo what was basically been reported by the reporters now. Tua Tagovailoa is done. He's not going to play another snap for the Miami Dolphins unless you have some horrendous circumstance where both Quinn Ewers and Zach Wilson get hurt and he has to come into play in the fourth quarter as the emergency quarterback or whatever. But if they can help it, he's done as a Dolphin. That much, the if has been decided. It's just a matter of how and when. And we'll kind of go into this here in depth in a minute, but it was interesting that Adam Schefter basically left on the table that they're open to cutting him. And I think that's pretty accurate based on what I heard over the weekend and how disappointed they are in Tua for several different reasons. We'll go into those now. This is part of the dump. Number one, first and foremost, it's on-field play, especially this year. Leading the league in interceptions. It's the throws that he makes that are bad. It's the throws he doesn't make that he used to be able to make. It's the decisions. It's the on-field leadership. It's the processing and lack thereof. It's the order of operations and lack thereof in terms of being organized. It's just been a mess. On top of that, I will confirm that he did not work with Nick Hicks and perform. I think that's been put out there by other podcasters and maybe by, I don't know if it's been put out by official sources, but I can confirm that. He didn't work out with Nick Hicks and perform. Now, some of the reasons I've heard about as to the why, I'll keep those private until I can get more confirmation on that. But I know for a fact that he did not work with them this past offseason. Nor did he work with 3D QB, which is run by Tom House. You might know him as a former Oakland A's pitcher. He was Tom Brady's personal throwing coach when he played for the Patriots. He worked with Tua in 2023 and 2024, but not this past offseason going into 2025. It shows his mechanics have been woeful from week one on. His arm strength, it was never great, but it looks worse than ever this year. And it shows. The team was disappointed that he didn't take being the highest paid player, being the highest paid person in the organization seriously, both as a player and as a leader. On top of that, there's off-field stuff. There's calling out the fan base in his post-game media availability or in midweek media availability. He's done it multiple times over the past 2 seasons. There's the lack of accountability and kind of throwing teammates and players under the bus. Some guys don't mind, some do, but the team officials and people in the front office know that you can't be doing that as the quarterback. The quarterback takes the blame when you lose and you pass the credit around when you win. And it hasn't been that way from Tua. Nice guy, sure, but kind of a full-blown PR nightmare at this point. And then there's the medical stuff. Obviously you have the concussion history, you have the injury history, not just the hip, but other stuff. And I think there's one more component which, I am not permitted to talk about. I think this will likely come out in time. It's probably going to be something that, an Adam Schefter or someone of that ilk will report. And at that point, I could probably go into a little more detail on it. But let's just say that, medically speaking, it is better, regardless if the Dolphins are 6-9 or they were still 9-6 and competing for the playoffs. It'd be better to walk away from Tua and just wipe your hands clean. Move on from the situation. It's a sunk cost. You're going to eat the $99 million. Just do it. I don't think, based on what I heard over the weekend, I doubt that there's any team that's going to be willing to take on Tua in a trade, regardless of how much money the Dolphins eat. I just don't. I think you would have to pay Tua plus a high pick to get back, a 7th rounder at best, just given what will be out there amongst the NFL teams and agents and in that realm. that is not available for public consumption. And I'll keep it that way. I was asked to, and I know not to burn people. That's why I think Adam Schefter included the bit about the Dolphins releasing them. I think the most likely outcome at this point, if I was going to bet on it, is going to be they'll list him as a post-June 1st cut. And that's why Adam Schefter talked about cutting Tyreek Hill to basically finance Tua being cut. It's a sunk cost. Move on. Stephen Ross isn't hurting for money. Just take your medicine and post-June 1st cut Tua is what I think will end up happening. Like it or not, I think that's the path. And I think that's the right decision because I think we saw that Tua, after the hip injury at Alabama, became a quarterback where you had to basically have him live within such like rare, stringent, extreme parameters. You had to have A, B, C, D, E, F, G in place in order to coax out the best of him that we saw in 22 and 23. And if you took one of those elements, if you took F or if you took B or if you took A out, wasn't always that great. And if you took two or more, you probably lost the game. And you look at the Dolphins' record in the Mike McDaniel era against teams with winning records, and it's what, like 5-17, 5-18? It's terrible. Tua was the quarterback for a lot of those games. I think we saw the ceiling, and I think if you look around the league look no further than what Joe Burrow did to the Dolphins this past Sunday. Look at how guys like Josh Allen have played this year, or Drake May, or Justin Herbert. I know it sucks, Dolph fans, but Justin Herbert's playing awesome. You look at Matt Stafford. You look at Mahomes, over the years. Maybe not so much this year, but over the years. That's what you're going to have to deal with. Lamar Jackson prior to 2025. At his best, Tua is not that. Never was, and he's never going to be. And he's certainly not going to be that for the Dolphins because you can't live in those parameters. Now, this is the other part that came out because we know Chris Greer's already fired. And we'll touch on that here in a minute. But Tua and Mike McDaniel, is it a package deal? Is it not? Before the Bengals game, people were talking about, well, it's more likely he wants to come back. Stephen Ross really likes him. They basically want to give him every chance to get this right. And then you go out and you give up 45 points to a 4-win Bengals team. I'm sorry, you can't live like that. And things are probably not going to get much better when you play Tampa Bay, who is fighting for a division, or New England when you got to go on the road for a team that's fighting for the division and the 1 seed in the conference. And a team that, quite frankly, is a lot better than the team you saw in week 2. I think it's very, very likely the Dolphins finish this year 6-11. Now, as to the Mike McDaniel thing, again, kind of what I heard was what Adam Schefter came out and reported yesterday, is that no real decision has been made. They wanted to see how things go with Quinn Ewers these last 3 weeks. Why that matters, I don't know. Why Stephen Ross would read into the 4-game win streak, considering that was against a terrible Bills defense and then 3 teams that are worse than the Dolphins record-wise. I don't know why that matters, but when push came to shove, they played the Steelers in a game that mattered, and the Dolphins collectively pissed their pants. From Tua, from McDaniel, pretty much everybody had a bad game that day, and pretty much everybody had an awful second half against the Bengals. And that's just kind of the realm you've lived in. Now, I've been 100% on the bandwagon that Mike McDaniel needs to go. I said so last year after the Jets game, and coming full circle against the Bengals, it kind of hit me. I remember the episode I recorded right when they fired Brian Flores, saying, I hope the Dolphins don't regret betting on Tua and canning Flores. Well, here we are 4 years later, and I think the Dolphins got it wrong. Yeah, I wonder what it would look like if Brian Flores had a different quarterback at the helm or didn't have Chris Grier as his GM. But that's another world we can't go back to. So with McDaniel, I think the Dolphins end up losing these last 2 games. I think Stephen Ross most likely is going to get rid of him. I think the only real scenario they would have to keep him is if the new general manager basically wants to play like the internal politics game and says, hey, McDaniel, this is your mess. You think you can win with yours? We'll give you 1 year. Because 2026 is going to be bad no matter who the coach is. Like, if you go out and you hire a new coach, you're probably going to have to structure his contract kind of the way the Dolphins did with Brian Flores, knowing that they were tearing everything down in 2019. So Flores got hired with a 5th year instead of the typical 4-year coach's contract. I would imagine you probably have to do that again because you're going to have to, it's time to pay the piper in terms of the salary cap. You have to reset. You have to rebuild in 2026. We can talk about that, more in this episode. I think the one reason McDaniel would be kept is because what coach would want to step into this circumstance? Maybe you promote Anthony Weaver from within. Maybe you look at the guy that I would want in Chris Shula, the Rams defensive coordinator. Obviously, he's got the name. He's had success with the Rams this year. Their defense is very good. Grandson of Don Shula. What kind of a homecoming could it be? I also happen to know a friend of Chris Shula's, and he and I talk. I didn't specifically ask him anything about the Dolphins, but I did ask, would he consider being a head coach? Because if you don't know the backstory, Chris Shula, Sean McVay, best friends. They met at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. They've been together basically since. The answer I got was, would he be a head coach? The answer was, if the right situation came along, yes. Is coaching for your grandfather's team the right situation? Maybe. We'll have to see. We'll get those answers in the coming month, basically. But if they lose these last 2 weeks, I'd lean towards Stephen Ross finally giving in and finally doing the Mike Ehrmantraut, hitting the full measure. And I'll have one more sip of the Lucky 13 for that. I think they finally go full measure and they clean house. Greer's gone. We know Tua's going. It's just a matter of when and how it's processed. And I think McDaniel goes too if they lose these last 2 weeks. If you look at Stephen Ross's statement that they plastered all over social media, the status quo isn't acceptable. Well, Mike McDaniel needs to win both of these last 2 games just to equal what they did last year. So by the very definition Ross laid out, if you lose one more game, you haven't equaled what you had as the status last year. Therefore, you're not even hitting the status quo. It's time for change. It's time for the full measure. Now, where it goes from there, I think, and I've speculated about this on the podcast, for 2 years now, really since they lost that Titans game on Monday Night Football in 2024, week 4, after Tua had gotten the concussion and Jordan Poyer took out Jalen Phillips, all that Titans game. We talked about Brandon Shore, who's like the head of football administration, chief negotiator, salary cap guy. I don't know what the title is or how they'll structure it, but I think basically he's probably in line to be the overseer, call it the chief operating officer or senior vice president, basically a Bill Parcells, Mike Tannenbaum type of role. And I think the general manager that they bring in will end up being more of, let's build the roster, let's set the archetype and build out processes for how we do this. Here's how we attack free agency. Here's how we're going to draft. Here's how we're going to scout. Because on top of getting rid of Chris Grier, they got rid of the co-directors of player personnel, Adam Engroff and Anthony Hunt. And those guys had been here a long time. So you're getting a lot of change in the scouting department, which I think is good. I think the fresh ideas and fresh eyes is a good thing. Now, Champ Kelly is going to get an interview to be the general manager. And obviously, the situation that you're going into with the Tua contract and how you have to handle that, because you're probably not getting a trade. You're dumping Tyreek Hill. And then you have other names of big contracts with little or no guaranteed money that you could get off the books and start rebuilding. Bradley Chubb, Austin Jackson, Minka Fitzpatrick, those guys all come to mind. A little tidbit about James Daniels. I would say there's better than a 50-50 chance he retires because of the injury and how that affected him. I doubt he will ever play a down for the Dolphins again. So I think we got the 3 snaps we're going to get, and that'll be it. But you get the idea. They're going to have to dump a lot of salary, dump a lot of cash in order to finance what they're going to have to do to process getting rid of Tua. That's the bed they made. That's the bed they're going to have to lay in. And right or wrong, because Brandon Shore signed off on this, I think he's going to be the guy in charge of doing that and making sure that there are guardrails in place financially, both related to the salary cap and related to the actual cash payouts, put in place to guard against doing what Chris Greer did and got away with doing, which is doling out big contracts to talent that wasn't homegrown. So I think your general manager is going to be someone who comes from a strong organization that either has drafted really well or is an organization that isn't like a big player in free agency that's fiscally responsible. Green Bay, Indianapolis, those two kind of come to mind. Looking like maybe like an Ed Dodds or I forget the gentleman that Kyle Krabs likes, John Eric Ellis maybe from Green Bay. I'll put up a board of general manager candidates and do a show on that later. I haven't had time to dive into it. But I think what you want is for them to basically build out plans. This is how we attack things. We're going to stick to our process. We're going to build the roster. And you've got kind of 3 what I would call marks in the plus column for taking this Dolphins general manager job. Number 1, right now, it's the only general manager position open. Obviously, there's other teams that may become open. Atlanta, Cleveland, Las Vegas, possibly the Bengals if they actually make that a GM title. But right now, Miami is the only spot open in town. So you got your pick. You have the most, at least as of right now, you have the most draft picks in the top 100 of the NFL draft. You've got a 1, a 2, and 3 threes. You're probably also going to end up netting yourself an additional 4th round compensatory pick plus a 5th round pick. So you're going to end up with, what is that? A 1st, a 2nd, 3 thirds, 2 4ths, and a 5th. So you probably got another 6 picks, 7 picks in the top 160 or so spots. That's a lot of swings at bat to try and get talent and get it right. And then the other thing is you're going to have a lot of cap space open up in 2027. The salary cap's going to keep growing. It's grown, between like 12 and 15% the last few years. So that dead cap money, even though it's high and they're talking $99 million, is the $99 million like the same percentage as Russell Wilson's 85 when you account for growth and inflation? I don't know. I haven't done the math on that. Ooh, that was the lucky 13 coming back up there. Pardon me. But you get the idea. Like, it's a significant number, but it's not a complete kneecapper. There is light at the end of the tunnel in terms of cap flexibility, contractual flexibility, and what you can do once you get through 2026. And this was the big point I had last year, is Stephen Ross basically punted on 2025 because he thought McDaniel and Greer could rebuild it. It's the same situation you had with Joe Philbin at the end of 2014. You knew he wasn't the guy. You knew it wasn't going to work. You knew Dennis Hickey was a waste of space. But they went ahead and pressed on into 2015 anyway because Mike Tannenbaum was the Band-Aid. Did it work? No. You had Dan Campbell take over as your coach after the first 4 games. I feel like that's what's going to happen next year if you keep Mike McDaniel. Unless you're going to make him, the full-fledged patsy and make him suffer through the mess that he helped engineer. And Mike McDaniel has a pretty strong hand in what has transpired over the last 4 years. So, I don't know what their pool of general manager candidates looks like. We really won't get any clue on interviews. You cannot interview until the regular season concludes. So, it'll at least be, 2 more weeks until we start hearing names of interviews. And if I am able to do another episode next week, and I will try, I'll pass on anything I hear. But that's what makes it attractive. It's the only job in town at the moment. You have a chance to basically build that from scratch, number one. Number two, you've got a lot of premium draft picks in 2026. And number three, you've got flexibility. And I would say the bonus is you've got an owner who's been exceedingly patient to a fault and is absent. So you don't have much accountability. And if you can work well with a Brandon Shore, or if the off chance they brought in someone else to fill that role, you're probably going to have a pretty long political life as the general manager of the Dolphins. You're probably going to get to see most, if not all, of your initial contract out. So that's kind of where things stand. I think you're going to finally get the full measure, the one thing that Stephen Ross has never tried: a new coach, a new general manager, and you're not going to get a franchise quarterback in 2026. You're probably looking at Quinn Ewers competing with a Malik Willis or a Carson Wentz or something like that as your scenario. Or, if you draft someone in like the 3rd or 4th round, something like that. I think your real answer is probably coming in 2027. And just knowing what I know about the Bengals and people close to them, I would get rid of any fantasies you have about Joe Burrow being a Dolphin now. Just don't even let yourself wander down that road. Where I see the rest of this roster, we'll go through a quick roster evaluation. I know we're getting kind of deep into the podcast here, but it's been a while, so we might as well just press on and do it. This is where, if you're a general manager and you want the challenge and you get to put your own stamp on things and build it your way, there's a lot of position rooms that don't have a lot to work with. You look at the quarterback room. Let's start offense, and then we'll run through defense. Quarterback is going to be pretty bare. You're only going to have Quinn Ewers back next year. Tua's going to be gone. I doubt you're going to pay Zach Wilson $6 million to do nothing. The running back room. You have 3 pretty capable backs with Devon Achane, Jalen Wright, and Ollie Gordon, who keeps seeming to battle weird injuries and fumbles, and really tailed off the second half of the season as Jalen Wright's kind of emerged. I will say this. There is internal support. And again, you don't know how many of the people in the personnel department, scouting department, all that stuff are still going to be here a month from now, a month and a half from now when there's a new GM. But from the people who are in here, there is support to get Devon Achane an extension, which I think is the right move. I think he's pretty ubiquitous, and you can use him in different ways in any different scheme you want. Doesn't necessarily have to be Mike McDaniel's. You could also use him to probably fetch a pretty nice asset if you wanted to. I don't think that's what the Dolphins will do. I think they will either let him play out the string or they'll give him an extension. But I think he'll be on the roster next year. You look at wide receiver. I think beyond Jalen Waddle, you can basically remake this room however you want. I think really the only name I would say beyond Jalen Waddle that I would want back would be Malik Washington. You can use him in the slot. You can use him as kind of a screen guy, a gadget guy. You can line him up in the backfield. He's been pretty good as a kick and punt returner. There's value in that on the team. But should he be your number 2 receiver, your number 3 receiver? No, probably not. Not in terms of targets. And you already have Devon Achane, who's probably going to be your number 2 most targeted player no matter what. But, I mean, you have the opportunity to remake that room. You can get someone with speed, like a Carnell Tate. You can find a big body player, which the Dolphins, someone step in and correct me after the show on this. I can't think of one that they've had since Brandon Marshall was here. That was any good anyway. Like, Roberto Wallace, who was the undrafted kid they signed the year we had Fitzpatrick. I can't think of his name. Number 18, Preston Williams. I'm not counting those guys. They didn't have, the stats or the longevity. But get yourself a big body receiver. You saw what T. Higgins could do. Jack Jones was in perfect coverage on 2 reps and just got mossed. You have a lot of flexibility at receiver to rebuild that whole room and remake it. Give Jalen Waddle a counterpart. Find a way to make Malik Washington your slot guy and not have to rely on him, as an X or a Z as much. The tight end room, I think it really depends on who comes in. I think Julian Hill has really improved as a blocker. You've gotten some mileage out of him as a receiver. The same can be said for Greg Dulcich. Hayden Rucci, I thought, showed some nice developmental chops as a blocking guy, and you're probably going to sign him to a futures contract unless he gets called up to the active roster between now and the end of the year. You've got some opportunity there. See if you can use it. But, I wouldn't let that take you out of the market for a tight end. But I don't think you need to go out and, actively find, the next Tyler Warren. If one falls into your lap, sure. You view it as a market opportunity. Offensive line, this will probably always be a need for the Dolphins, but you've gotten really good play out of Aaron Brewer, the best center in football this year. And if you don't believe me, follow Duke Manyweather and Brandon Thorne, 2 of the most renowned O-line gurus there are. They love them. And again, like Devon Achane, there is internal support to get Aaron Brewer an extension. You might almost have to do it out of necessity just to finance yourself cap space to build the roster, given what you're going to do with Tua. But he more than deserves it. And with how mobile he is, I don't think you're running the risk of him falling, off from a production standpoint any great measure for another year or 2. Patrick Paul, I think, has done really nice things as a pass protector. His run blocking leaves some things to be desired at times. But as a pass protector, I feel like you've got 2/5 of your offensive line, Paul and Brewer. You can put those guys in Sharpie for next year. You can put them in pen. We've kind of seen the light click on for Jonas Savaianaya after the bye week. It hasn't been all roses by any stretch, but you kind of get it. And if things work out and maybe you get a better offensive system for him or a better offensive line coach, maybe you have your future blindside protectors with Paul and Savaianaya. Maybe you move him to the right side because, again, I doubt James Daniels will be a Dolphin next year. I think he's gone. I think you have a lot of questions about what to do with Austin Jackson and the money he's made versus how much time he's missed. Good run blocker, above average pass protector, and in true pass protection reps, still, I'd be very cautious to keep him. And you got to build out depth, and you still need another starter on your offensive line. Now, this one comes to the request of a friend, Den54. Asked me what I thought about Anthony Weaver. And, that piece of shit Jordan Poyer, I know he talked about it in the Go Long article he did with Ty Dunn about how no one understood the defense. I'm not surprised Jordan Poyer didn't understand it. I get what Anthony Weaver is trying to do. I don't think he did a very good job at all trying to teach it. And you kind of heard that in his media availability today. Well, we got to have guys in house before August. We've got to get together sooner. Okay, true. Thanks for calling that out. But it also helps if you don't try and throw everything in the kitchen sink at the team all at once. You're playing multiple players, most of them rookies in my eyes, that I'm going to pinpoint here, in positions and roles they have no experience playing. Playing Kenneth Grant as a 5 technique 2 games into the season. What the fuck are you doing? Playing Jordan Phillips next to Zach Sealer for as long as they did as a tandem and nickel was never going to work. Jordan Phillips is a tree stump. He's a damn good one, but he can't move laterally. You need someone with more athleticism to play off of Zach Sealer. And basically they've kind of remedied that halfway through the year by playing Kenneth Grant and Zeke Biggers next to Sealer. And it's worked out well. You didn't have much in the way of pass rush because Chubb and Phillips were coming off injuries. And you couldn't generate anything, so you were blitzing the bejesus out of teams the first month of the season to no effect, trying to play more man, and as soon as you went back to your zone stuff, poof, even though you weren't winning games, the defense started playing better. So I know a lot of people really like Anthony Weaver, and he's head coach material. I'll say this. I think he's head coach material, but it ain't because he's a defensive guru. It's because he's well-spoken. I think he articulates his thoughts. He's interviewed well in the past. Came in second last year for New Orleans. And he's been around the winning culture with the Ravens and the Texans. He's been around guys that have coached for those teams and with the New England Patriots. I think he's a pretty good defensive play caller, situationally. I think there are some big misses he's had, some egregious misses, some with Jordan Poyer last year. Surprise, surprise. Would I like him to come back? Sure. Can you upgrade on him if he goes? Sure. It's 50-50 to me. Seems like a good guy, well-spoken, probably going to get an interview to be the head coach if McDaniel was fired. Would I want him? I'm not so sure. I'd probably pass. I think the scheme is really cool if you have the talent. And I think that's more or less what kind of, if you're going to view the Dolphins-Bengals game in a vacuum, that's kind of what got you beat. The offense, special teams, you had 3 turnovers and a turnover on downs, and you gave up 4 touchdowns in a row. Kind of the same situation with Pittsburgh the week before. The offense couldn't do shit. You can't play complimentary football worth a damn, which has been the case in the entire McDaniel era. And people blame the defense. Well, look at the defense. You don't have any pass rusher worth a shit at the moment. And we'll talk about Chop Robinson here in a second. And your secondary is makeshift. And you were missing Minka Fitzpatrick on the Sunday, who was kind of the traffic cop. Bad things were going to happen. And you're playing Joe Burrow, who's finally got his offensive line working relatively well. And you got Chase and Higgins both back at the same time. Not surprised at the outcome. Surprised it got that bad. But not surprised that the Bengals won that game pretty handily. Let's start with the rooms. Defensive tackle. I think each of the 3 rookies has kind of taken a turn at being the guy. Jordan Phillips at the beginning of the year was probably the best of the 3. But you were hurting the entire system by playing him as much as you were. By the time they corrected that and started playing Kenneth Grant more, things sort of course corrected. And I think they found, you have a pretty good role for Phillips where you can play him as a base nose tackle, whether it's a 3-4, 4-3, fine. You can play him as a 0, as a 1, as a 2-eye. He can do that. Don't ask him to do a whole lot more. And that was kind of my thing that I wanted them to search for in camp, which I'll take the loss on that. I thought he might have more as a 3 technique or 4-eye. He doesn't. He's better as a nose than I ever thought he would be based off what I saw of him in Maryland. But I think that's all that he is. He's, as much as people want to throw flowers at him, kudos to the Dolphins. It's a good pick in the 5th round. But I think that's what he is. He's a base down player. You can probably get some mileage out of him in nickel if you want to play like big nickel or run situation nickel. But that's it. Kenneth Grant, I thought kind of the middle of the season, starting with the Chargers game, Atlanta, Cleveland, the second Buffalo game at home, the Commanders game, really, really good. And then kind of since then, Saints, Jets, Steelers, Bengals, Zeke Biggers has kind of stepped up as more of like a true hustle player. And you wonder, is someone like Kenneth Grant hitting the rookie wall a bit, and Zeke Biggers looks better now because he hadn't played much of the year. I think ultimately you need to use Kenneth Grant more as a 2-eye and a 3 technique, which Weaver still seems, hesitant to do. But if you look at the reps when he's been there, or even as a 1 technique, it's been great. Like, just because you have Jordan Phillips doesn't mean you can't play Kenneth Grant tighter to the ball. It's been awesome when you've done it. They just don't do it enough. But I like the rotation, and I think you have 4 rock-solid guys. Sealer, I think we've seen the effects this year of having to play without Christian Wilkins or future Hall of Famer Calais Campbell next to him. He's, someone from another podcast had stated, Sealer carried Wilkins. Never did, never was. It's the other way around. Wilkins was the better player, and you saw that benefit Zach Sealer. And I think you're seeing it now, where you don't have the caliber of player that Wilkins was, or a future Hall of Famer like Calais Campbell, who's a savvy vet and knows all the tricks. All of a sudden, Sealer starts getting beat, starts getting pancaked, doesn't put up the sack production. We've seen it come alive, kind of with Kenneth Grant, having the light come on. But I think you've got 4 rock-solid guys. I think you still need a 5th guy. And if you're going to play a Weaver-style system, or, if you hired Chris Shula, I think you still need like one more dependable big body. Someone that isn't Benito Jones and someone that isn't Matthew Butler to kind of be in that rotation. Your defensive end, your edge, your 3-4 outside linebacker room, whatever you want to call it, this one needs work. Bradley Chubb, you should cut him on merit, not just because of the money situation. He hasn't played very well in about a month. Jalen Phillips is gone. Matthew Judon's gone. There's really not much there for Quentin Bell other than being like an edge setter against the run. Cameron Good, you shouldn't even bother with unless you bring him back for special teams. Chop Robinson is kind of the disappointing one. Now, he's had injuries. He had a back injury, a calf injury in camp and preseason. He had the concussion. You've seen his production pick up a little bit, but it's fair to call this season a sophomore slump. Now, I would also put out there that not that he's doing anything bad or illegal, but I think he's one of those guys, much like a Cam Smith, who maybe enjoys Miami a lot, and you probably want him to focus more on football than enjoying Miami. We'll just leave it at that. Not to say he can't be a really good player, and I also think this is a fault of Weaver's, where basically up until they traded Jalen Phillips, they were trying to use him as a straight-up 3-4 outside linebacker, lining up in tight techniques. Like, I don't know what made Weaver basically try and run the PhD version of this defense with 3 rookie D tackles, an edge player who had basically been a defensive end only as a rookie in Chop. And you'll notice, once they started letting him play as like a wide 9 or a wide 5 on the weak side, his production has gone up the last month or so. It's not where you want it to be, but it's better than where it was. So these are some of the idiosyncrasies with Weaver where I don't think I think he knows what he wants, but what he wants and what his personnel are good at, you're not on the same level. The personnel, they're taking the 201, 202, maybe a 301 class at best. He's teaching the 500 and 600 level classes. And there's just a mismatch there. Maybe there's an issue with how he teaches it. maybe there is more to it that guys weren't there. But I don't think the secondary has necessarily been a huge problem the way people thought it would be. So, that one to me sounds like a little bit of sour milk, sour grapes. Like, that sounds like an excuse for trying to cover your tracks for maybe not teaching things or maybe not having the right vision and path developmentally for guys once you got them in here. Your off-ball linebackers, like Jordan Brooks has been great. Should probably be a first-team All-Pro. Same with Aaron Brewer. There is support for him to get an extension. So probably the big three candidates, Achane, Brewer, Brooks, the guys that you would want to extend, of the personnel department that's left, there is support for those guys to get extensions and remain Dolphins. Now, obviously, that's dependent on a new GM, who that is, and then how many of those three guys get extensions. When do they get extensions? We won't know. We won't get answers until we have the new GM. But just know that of the front office support and personnel department that's left, there is internal support to get those three guys extended and remain Dolphins. So that to me is a plus. Willie Gay, KJ Britt, both free agents. They haven't done much on defense this year. God help him, but Tyrell Dodson had a stretch in the win streak where he played pretty well, and then he ran into the Steelers game and forgot how to tackle. Like, I think he's fine if you make him like a third linebacker, but good God, if you're on the board and like Sonny Styles is there, pull the trigger. You can do a lot better, but I also understand that you're going to be in a position next year where you don't want to create any more holes than you already have. You look at corner, like Jack Jones is a free agent, Rasul Douglas is a free agent. We don't know what we have in Storm Duck, who is going to be one of the starters. Kader Kohu's a free agent. You still kind of don't know what you have much in Jason Marshall. Like, he's played well at times for you, both inside and outside. But we just haven't gotten to see him enough. Julius Brents played well, is under contract, but hurt again. I don't think we've seen AJ Green the second on defense yet. You can go ahead and show Ethan Bonner the door. Unless you keep him as a pure special teams guy, there's nothing there defensively. Been saying that for 2 years. Just like Tanner Conner, Ethan Bonner can go. They finally got Tanner Conner off the freaking practice squad. Ethan Bonner can go the same way. Safety. Fatu Melifon was a free agent. I could see you bringing him back for depth. There's enough intrigue there, but he shouldn't be starting. Ashton Davis is basically Jordan Poyer this year. Like, get him off the team now. Dante Trader, I want to like him, but he is slow. He cannot cover ground. Good tackler, plays with good technique, seems to be a pretty football IQ savvy guy, but he is slow. I don't know that you're going to want to pay Minka Fitzpatrick the amount of money you owe him. It's not guaranteed. So maybe you rework that some way or somehow. But I would not be surprised one bit if Minka Fitzpatrick was allowed to test free agency. And much like, if Sonny Styles was sitting there and you're in need of a linebacker, if Caleb Downs is sitting there and you're on the board at 10, turn in the card. And it's kind of funny, Travis Wingfield mentioned this on podcasts. It's a line I texted to him. If you need a defender, just draft the kid from Ohio State. They're all good. Take them. So, like, suffice to say, there's not a whole lot of talent you're working with that's under contract next year. There's some key pieces that are. You still have Achane, you still have Waddle, you've got Paul, you've got Brewer, you've got the 3 rookie D tackles, you've got Sealer, you've got Brooks. You've got some pieces, but you need a hell of a lot more, and you're not going to have much capital to play with in the free agency market. So you're going to have to be really good in the draft and be really good at scouting and finding undrafted free agents who can at least help you be competitive in 2026. But it's going to be a pretty long year, I think. And I think the more you can kind of get it into your head that next year is about the new GM, hopefully a new coach, developing systems, developing players, and kind of gearing up for 2027. That's the lens I would view things with, and I think there's room for some optimism in that. But you have to level set. And I think it starts with accountability, and that's got to come from Stephen Ross. And if he's not going to be an in-the-building owner, then it has to be by proxy, which is probably why you keep hearing this groundswell for Brandon Shore being a COO or the SVP, or, I think, who was it? Connor Orr used a specific example where they related him to, like, Les Snead in the Rams front office is the general manager. He does the football transactions. He builds the roster. There's another guy, I want to say Kevin Demoff, who basically does the business side. And that issue is specifically, couched in terms of the Dolphins. So that's something I would look out for. We've gone over an hour on the podcast. I'm sorry for rambling and going on, but that was just kind of the brain dump of things in light of the Dolphin situation this year. Again, I'll try and do a podcast next week. Thank you guys for listening. You can follow me on social at KevinMD4. Appreciate you guys listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. Have a very Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. If I don't talk to you before then, have a happy and safe New Year. Fins up. This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly was brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all the pro and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is a spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com. Caneswear.com.